Monica Perez, and we welcome back today a returning guest, a fan favorite, Iain Davis, IAIN Davis.com, who is a prolific writer of articles and books, including Pseudo Pandemic. And you can find his articles on Off Guardian. He's on many different outlets. He's got a great Substack. He's got a great website. If you look at his website, the amount of interviews and topics he covers, it's really like a gift. And I really appreciate your time. And how are you, Iain? Thank you for being here.
I'm very well, Monica. Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I was really loved seeing your recent articles that were in Off Guardian. You've done other articles since then, but about the CBDC, the central bank digital currency. It's a part one and a part two, exactly as I wanted to address this subject for people who, aren't into crypto, aren't knee deep into this. And the way I thought you broke it out was just so accessible, was kind of what is the CBDC and what are the real implications for us? And so I would love for you to give us a little bit of that. And as always, I'd like to know how you crack the code, because you're not an expert in any one thing in the health and finance, whatever, but you obviously really understand this stuff, or you would not be able to explain it in such a simple way. So I like to hear a little bit of how the sausage is made as well.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure. Do you want me to sort of give an outline of CBDC or what I think CBDC is all around?
That'd be great.
Central bank digital currency is a new form of money. It's not money as we are familiar with it. So, we might think of that. I mean, there are already different types of money that we're all familiar with. So, for example, there is cash, which is obviously paper money or coins that we exchange for goods and services. Then there's electronic money. Now, most of our money is electronic money. So, that's our debit cards, our credit cards, and so forth, that we pay for things at automated checkouts or whatever. We just go beep and we've paid, and it all comes directly out of our bank accounts. So, but that is not what central bank digital currency will be. We might experience it as electronic money in that sense, as in we'll have a card attached to our CBDC wallet, central bank digital currency wallet. And we might well experience it in the same way. So we just go and beep, we just go and pay for something at the checkout, and that's as far as we know. That's what it will feel like from our end. But it is fundamentally different for this reason. Central bank digital currency, and we can go into the details of how it is issued in a little bit, but this is probably the most important thing to grasp, is what they're calling programmable money. So this means that because it's a purely digital asset, it is fundamentally, it's a string of code. So each central bank digital unit of central bank digital currency is a string of code. So that code can have attached to it controls, such as smart contracts, what they're calling smart contracts. So what that means is that the conditions for the expenditure of that money can be set within the money itself. So, for example, a central bank might decide that in order to maintain sustainable development, you can't buy wood-fired burners, for example. So they decide that you can't buy wood-fired burners because they're bad for the environment. So when you go to pay for the wood-fired burner, you'll get your card out, your CBDC card out, and you will try to buy it, but that transaction will already have been disabled. So you won't be able to physically buy it. So okay. the person in the shop will go, "Oh, sorry, you can't buy that item." Declined. It's not that you haven't got enough money. You might have enough CBDC in total, but you just can't physically make that purchase.
I had thought years ago when Mayor Bloomberg tried to ban sugary drinks in New York, I said someday they're going to have a progressive tax on how much sugar you consume. So your first ice cream cone would have like a 10% tax. But your third one of the week would have like 100% tax. I just envisioned this like 10 years ago, and I'm confident that they would use it that way if they could. But my question, I have two questions. First of all, can Bitcoin be limited this way, do you think? Is Bitcoin similarly programmable, but it just it doesn't get programmed? Like, could
Uh,
you use an individual Bitcoin?
Theoretically, it could be because it's a similar basis. So most people think that Bitcoin is based on a blockchain technology, or what they call distributed ledger technology. So this idea, basically, it is exactly as it sounds. It's a ledger of transactions, and each unit of Bitcoin, subdivision of Bitcoin, is a string of numbers, of figures, and a hash sum, which you can spend. So you make a transaction and that goes onto the ledger. But the point of distributed ledger technology is that it is not centrally controlled. So there isn't like a single server that administers the whole network. It's decentralized technology in effect. So that means that there are lots and lots and lots of different nodes, mini servers, if you like, that are serving as the or are holding copies of the ledger. Let's put it that way. They're holding copies of the ledger. So the whole ledger is put together, but because all these separate individual, and more importantly, they can either be anonymous or not. But in the case of Bitcoin, they are anonymous. These anonymous nodes collectively form the distributed ledger that enables the blockchain to function. And there are different types of distributed ledger technology. So it doesn't just have to be blockchain based. There are other types of technology as well. But the point is, those nodes are decentralized and anonymous. All right. So no one single node is controlling the network.
So because they're decentralized, you couldn't program it to fail in one way every time, because it could then access a different node, perhaps?
Yeah, you can't take out one part and the whole network goes down.
Right. Okay.
Because it's replicated, but through different nodes.
Okay. So, but the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, so that it can attach those limitations, and those limitations are really, I mean, that's a policy, but that's a
Yeah.
policy decision. But it doesn't sound to me, it doesn't sound to me like, who's making that decision. It sounds like the banks make that decision, and that there isn't really a legislative structure being proposed around those choices.
Yeah, I mean there is a legislative kind of environment within which they're trying to establish central bank digital currency, but a big part of that legislation, for example, we see in Russia is what they've got a law on what they're calling digitalized financial assets, which includes cryptocurrency.
Right.
So, but it isn't limited to cryptocurrency. It's about things called, without getting too far off the subject,
Yeah.
it's about things called tokenized digital assets.
Right.
So you could, for example,
Yes. Oh, yeah. That's later.
so that's
Yeah.
something else,
Okay.
right? So, but so they're trying to create an environment, a legislative environment, in which all of these things operate together. So, they might regulate something like, I mean, who knows what they'll do with Bitcoin? I mean, the point with something like Bitcoin is that it's very difficult to regulate it because of
Right.
its the distributed ledger
Yeah.
technology, blockchain based distributed node model. So there's no reason why anyone couldn't fork it. Now there have been lots of forks in the past. So you if you closed it down,
Yes.
you people could fork it
Yes.
elsewhere.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's
But the CBDC isn't like that, though.
CBDC is fundamentally different because
Okay.
CBDC, that there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of debate thus far about what kind of model, because there are lots and lots of different potential models for CBDC, how it in terms of its technological function, how it will function. But what has emerged, certainly we're seeing this with the digital pound and the digital ruble, and with the ECNY, the Chinese digital yuan, or whatever you want to call it, is this idea of what they're calling an API layer, which they're calling the platform, which will enable the central banks. So this is another point about central bank digital currency. Only the central banks issue the currency. Nobody else. At the moment, with our modern fiat currency system, commercial banks issue
Yes.
most currency is issued by
And
commercial banks.
and it seems to me from what I was reading when you were talking about, I forget what it was called, split monetary circuit, was where you said that at the central bank level, there is a base money that the commercial banks have and use as a basis for what is called broad money, in that the commercial banks can lend on that. Now the reserve requirement's zero. Although I looked it up and the reserves are the same as they were before. It used to be like half required and then half surplus, and now it's
Mm,
all
mm,
surplus, but it's the same. It's about $3 trillion, I think. I think
mm,
that's what it was. But I'm just saying, like, so they don't seem to care that there's a requirement. They do keep reserves. And then from the reserves, there's another kind of layer of decision making that a commercial bank will give out a loan. And that is what puts the money in circulation. And to me, the
mm,
way I was reading that is that gives you a little bit of market give and take as to supply and demand of money. But I could, maybe I'm reading that wrong. Whereas if you take out that middleman and the central bank is giving it directly, that first of all is immediately inflationary, which seems to be like the real reason of what just happened, which we can get into.
mm,
And then because they've already started a piece of this process by going direct, as you explained, happened during COVID. We can get into that. But so they, it feels to me like it takes out any kind of interaction with the market, and also is a super powerful tool to manipulate the economy and society by just having that direct, like you can put on the gas, put on the brakes, because the central bank just creates it by fiat also. It's not like
yeah,
Bitcoin where
yeah,
it has a predetermined limit.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's the same. Yeah, it's exactly that. So it's a combination of, you like, if the kind of issuance of currency that we saw with Bitcoin, which was the issuance of 21 million Bitcoin, and that's it. There'll never be any more Bitcoin. It's just that. So, it's about subdivisions of those units, but the units themselves are not going to go up or not going to go down. There'll never be more than 21 million Bitcoin, right? So that's kind of controls inflation to an extent. But I mean, of course, inflation is really only, if you take the issue of money, the monetary inflation out of the inflation equation, you're
Right.
still left with some price fluctuation. So you're still going to have price fluctuation.
Yeah, because
So
you have supply and demand issues, which
yeah,
is what contributed, like the twofold thing that happened to because of inflation in the COVID era was this idea of going direct, which I'm a little fuzzy on, so I'd like you to explain that. And then the other thing was they put the brakes on production while stimulating consumption. So I can't imagine ever coming across a pure example of more money chasing fewer goods, which is how they kind of
yeah,
define in the textbooks inflation.
yeah,
So they seem
yeah.
to have done that on purpose, probably to get over the 2008 zero interest rates in perpetuity, that there was just no other way. But I think that's what this was all, that the financial aspects of COVID was all about that.
Yeah, I mean, and what they also did during COVID was massively increase the money supply to meet that. So they hugely increased the amount of money that was available, but nearly all of that money went into the financial markets. It didn't go, even despite the fact that to a certain extent they were bailing out these small, well, they weren't, were they? Because they were just lending them
They were
money, but
lending the money,
they
which
were
is how
lending,
money
yeah.
is created.
Yeah. So money. Yeah. So let's get back to that. So money is created at the moment by commercial banks when they make a loan. 97% or more of all money in circulation at the moment is created by commercial banks when they make a loan. Now, people will say, well, that's not true. I go to work and I get paid, a salary, and I pay that as a deposit into the bank. That's my money and I can take it out. That's true. That's all true. But where did that money originate from? Where did it come? And if you trace that money back and back and back and back and back, it can only, in our modern fiat currency system, our current international monetary and financial system, that 97% or more of that money originated when a bank made a loan. Now, this is called credit creation, right? It's the credit creation model of money. Guess what? It's not credit, right? It's not credit because they haven't created anything. It's not like they've taken the money and then, there was this body of money over here that they've then shifted into your account. So they haven't, there's no process of credit. There is no credit. It's called credit creation because that's about the only way that we can, other than outright fraud and usury, that's about the best way to describe it. So you go into a bank account. So you go to a bank and you say you want to borrow money for a mortgage, for example. So you go in there and you say you want to buy, I don't know, $300,000 for a mortgage. You go through all the checks and balances and they see whether you're quote unquote credit worthy, which means whether or not they can assess whether you will go to work and pay it back, right? And then to put that money as a deposit in your account, okay, they literally type numbers onto a computer, right? There's no equivalent amount of money in a vault somewhere that they've lent you. They've just created it out of nothing.
So if there were a blockchain for every dollar in your bank account right now, which there isn't, but if there were like a ledger that you could go back with that dollar, it might have gone around whatever to your boss and then down to you or whatever. But if you went back to that actual unit, it would be traced to a moment in time when Citibank just put it in your account and then jotted off a little post-it to the Fed saying, I just gave that guy $1 million for no good reason. But you have my 50 cents, so just put it on my account, right? Yeah. So like there's a connection between the commercial bank and the central bank in that moment, is there not? It has to be recorded somewhere other than just Citibank.
Yeah, well, so the deposit, okay, that you've now got, so you've now got $300,000 as a deposit in your account, which you're going to use to buy a property, right? So that deposit is a liability of the banks, right? It's not your money, it's their money. It's a liability. Well, they claim it as theirs because they claim it as their own liability.
Yeah.
So that liability of $300,000 in our example exists as it's double entry bookkeeping as well, because it also exists as a liability of the banks on its central bank balance sheet, which uses a completely different model of money. They use something called base money. When they talk about the base rate, it's because the base money is what banks use. So banks exchange base money.
Interesting.
We exchange broad money. So you've got this double entry bookkeeping system where you've got this money that's sitting in your account as a liability of the commercial banks, which is also a liability for them on their base money at their central bank account. The asset that they have to offset the liability is your mortgage agreement, right? You've signed a mortgage agreement.
Yes.
Which is an agreement to pay back that amount of money, right? Plus interest. So they claim that as an asset in their accounts, which is also an asset for the bank on their central bank balance sheet.
Got it.
So you've got a liability of the banks, which they claim as their own because it's their liability, and an asset of the banks, which they claim as their own because it's their asset. The only that money, that $300,000 that's just gone poof, just been created out of nowhere, that then you might use it, for example, to buy a property. So that money, that commercial bank created money.
I just did that.
Yeah,
we got a loan.
So that commercial bank created money has gone to your vendor, whoever sold you the property. So they have now got this fiat currency, which they can then spend in the wider economy. So that money has filtered. It's come from nowhere. This is the important thing to grasp with fiat currency.
Yeah.
It's gone poof. It's like magic. It's what Professor Richard Werner called fairy dust.
Oh, I just read his article in Fortune.
Yeah.
Right. That I was so impressed that Fortune published that, such an expose of CBDC. because I was researching some of your concepts. So go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, so that money is then fed into the real economy, but that means that us, the people, we have to work in whatever capacity to pay back that money to the commercial bank, but ultimately that means to the central bank, because it's their base money that this is all panned out in, with assets and liabilities in the central bank's base. Now the central bank charged the commercial banks for services, and then they charge for creating money for cash as well. So they've got lots of different ways of making money, the central banks, but the basic way that they make money is charging the commercial banks for the interest that the commercial banks has to pay on its reserve accounts. So that means if they're charging a base rate of 2%, say, to the central banks, to the commercial banks, in order for a commercial bank's mortgage agreement with you to be viable, for them to make a profit, it has to be at least more than the base rate, because otherwise they're not going to make any money, because they're only going to have to pay the full amount back to the central bank.
But not to make things too complicated, but the reserves that they have is just a fraction of their liabilities, but it's the liabilities they have to pay the base rate on.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it gets right. So as you were saying to me earlier, there is no. It all comes down to how much liquidity that a bank has got. So the Basel Accords, which are set by the Bank of International Settlements, were a series of agreements which said how much a bank's liquidity calculation should be, how much liquidity it should have in order to be able to be what they call viable, in order to be able to function as a bank, in order to lend.
Right.
So it's equity. You have to calculate its equity, which is a balance of all its assets and liabilities.
Okay. Yes,
And then
I understand.
and then as long as its equity gives it sufficient liquidity, i.e., it can meet its obligations, its debt obligations, then it can lend money, according to the Bank for International Settlement, the Basel Accords. I mean, we're talking virtually nothing. I mean, it's like
right.
0.8% or something like that. So basically, commercial banks currently, under the current model, have got pretty much free rein to create as much money as they like. There are limitations and regulations. Central banks have got, there's Financial Services Committee and so forth that design certain parameters, but more or less it's a free for all for commercial banks. Central bank digital currency will fundamentally change that, because it will take commercial banks out of the money creation scam. Commercial banks will be removed from it. So Deutsche Bank and HBC and Citibank and JP Morgan and all that, they won't be able to run their little scam anymore. Now, so what all the people like the Bank for International Settlements have been doing, and what governments are now presenting, because I mean the model that the British government has presented, its so-called platform model for a retail CBDC, is pretty much lifted word for word from Bank for International Settlement policy documents on the same thing, right? So they've taken what the Bank for International Settlement has created as a model and run with it. So how are they going to get the commercial? Because CBDC will only be issued by the central bank, right? They'll be the only ones issuing the money. The commercial banks won't. They won't have that.
Won't the commercial banks just go completely under? Isn't this the basis of their business?
Right. So this is what I mean about creating a new international monetary and financial system, right? Because if they continue with the current one, you're right. Not only would the commercial banks go under, they've got no reason to go along with it. We could
And
get
they
up
would have to. I'm wondering if the whole Silicon Valley Bank, which I found this in my cabinet and I think is probably now a collector's item, that that whole thing, they blame it on interest rates going up and messing up their duration or whatever. But maybe they're just trying to obfuscate what could happen because there was a little bit of a changing of the guard. They already started doing this go direct, eliminate the commercial. And I'm wondering if all this stuff was just a scam to cover that up, or there's a lot of whitewash in the talking points. But anyway, I feel like they're telling us about banking instability just about when they're about to destabilize banking. But maybe they're not. Maybe they've got a different solution in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a slight. We can cover that in a minute if you like. But I mean, I suggest that we just that this is an important thing to grasp, right?
Yes.
So it would take, theoretically, the CBDC model would take the commercial bank's money creation scam out of business, right?
Yeah.
So what the central banks have said is that we will provide this platform layer, this API layer, through which we will issue central bank digital currency. Now, what they've also said is, at the moment, we won't program that central bank digital currency. We'll just issue it as a blank check, basically, right? So we'll issue it, but at the moment, we won't program that. But they've also said it is important that central bank digital currency meets the policy commitments of the government, right? So they're saying we're not going to change it. So what we want is for the commercial banks to act as the nodes, the controlled nodes in this different type of distributed ledger, right? More of a controlled model, a centralized controlled model, to act as the entities that will program the money. So we're taking you out of the money creation scam, but we're also going to give you the power to write your own smart contracts.
I feel
that's how they're getting them on board.
Yeah, I feel like there's a little bit of I see transactions all over the place now that have little green leaves. I think it's different for y'all than it's for us, but like for us, it says you can pay more to earn a green leaf on this exact same transaction. And I remember Parallel Mike, who's in Poland, said it's the opposite. They'll give you a discount for using a green leaf. Yeah. But I'm thinking that, I feel like that whole SGE or whatever, I forget what it's called, the green stuff is going to give a veneer on the restrictions on the money. And it'll give them an excuse to make it look like, well, we don't allow these kind of transactions because they're not green, for starters. But really, that's just going to be a way to start us accepting a limited regime on the money.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a very good thing earlier. You said about, most people who are health conscious would probably welcome the idea that, if that children so this is something you could do, a smart contract.
Yes.
Right? So you could put a smart contract on CBD so that no child under the age of 18 can buy high sugar, or can only buy like a limited amount of high sugar or vape. Yeah, right. Yeah. Good. So no child under the age of 18 can vape. They can't buy one. So think about this. This is an important concept in CBDC. That means that government can announce a policy, right? And providing their commercial partners, which would be the banks, agree with that policy, are on board, they won't need any legislation. They won't need to legislate.
Or executive or judiciary.
Or the executive. They won't need to.
It would be costless, perfect enforcement.
Yeah.
So instantaneous.
Yeah.
Costless, perfect without legislation. So is someone going to challenge? I mean, do you think that's challengeable from a constitutional basis? Because they've already carved out currency from its constitutional fetters here.
Yeah. Well, no, it won't be challengeable at all, because the central banks are immune from prosecution. They can do whatever they like.
They're going to say that it's voluntary. Like they're going to say in the beginning that you don't have to use it.
Yeah. Well, it'll all be voluntary, it'll be totally voluntary. And it all comes with digital ID, by the way. Digital ID is absolutely a nailed on certainty. You won't be able to use central bank digital currency without digital ID.
So will you even have a device, or will you just have to bring your eyeball?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. It'll all be done on biometric recognition. So it could be fingerprints, eyeball scanners, retina scanners, facial recognition, whatever. So all of this comes together. all of this comes together, as you just said. That's a very good phrase, by the way. That it's instantaneous policy enforcement without legislation or any really kind of decision making process.
And
But
no cost.
certainly
No
no
law
democrat,
enforcement,
no law enforcement,
investigative
nothing,
body, no FBI. You don't have to
nothing,
look into anything, no proof, no due
nothing.
diligence, no redress.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. That's what CBDC is
See, because
all about.
that's the thing with this with our tyranny is that we don't mind it because it doesn't get perfectly enforced.
Yeah.
So, like when I lived in New York, and for years they tried, like they would have regulations about smoking, whatever, and I would completely ignore them, and so would all good New Yorkers. And then I moved to California for a while, and I came back, and they, I heard they passed a law against smoking. It was like Giuliani or Bloomberg; they were both total fascists, and I remember on two separate occasions when I had returned to New York. Once I was in the subway smoking a cigarette, and somebody said, they passed a law. And I said, oh, go fuck yourself. And she said, I'm trying to do you a favor because like these bums are cops and someone's going to run out and give you $150 ticket. Like it's a real ticket and they will get you. And I was like, enforcement? This
Yeah,
is
yeah,
horrible.
yeah.
And then when I was at the bar, again, I just like lit up my cigarette and somebody next to me said, they passed a law. And I said, go fuck yourself. And they said, actually, the bartender or the restaurant will have to pay a fine. Like someone will call, which I would consider not a New Yorker, but somebody's going to call, and then they might not give you a ticket, but it's a regulation, like a health regulation, and that's why it didn't have to pass the legislature. It did not. And it would impart this extreme fine on a guy I was trying to support with my business. And that was it. I was like, oh, it's enforcement. They're enforcing it now. And they didn't have to do it with legislation. And they didn't really have to do it with cops, although there was some of that. This will eliminate that completely. And I just remember, that was kind of it. And then years later, not that long later, I was at my favorite restaurant there, which was the Four Seasons, in the Seagram's building, like not the hotel. And there was the bartender, the bar was empty. It's the greatest bar, ever crafted. And the bar was empty. And I said, like, what the hell happened? And he's like, it's the smoking law.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to come out and spend $20 on a drink, which it was still like $17 back then, many years ago, in New York. And he said, no, who's going to spend that kind of money? And they don't even get to smoke, that the smokers are the ones who drink.
Yeah. No, it's exactly that kind of thing, but like on a scale and a depth of penetration into society that we can't possibly imagine at the moment.
The nuance of how they could manipulate that is like, yes, maybe they'll let you smoke a half a pack of Capris or Marlboro Lights or something. But if you were going to, at a party, like they could literally do it to that level. And because I remember I said about the smoking, I said to a friend of mine, I said, someday they're going to take your coffee away from you. And he said, no chance. You're ridiculous. Smoking is gross, blah, blah, blah. So then they took away sugary drinks. Okay. It's not the guy's coffee, and coffee is what the production runs on. So they're probably not going to take that away. But they can determine anything. I mean, the ingredients in your face powder, like anything that they want to regulate, and they would have to have no regulation whatsoever, no regulatory process, no legislative process whatsoever to arbitrarily determine that one product is okay and another isn't. And the possibility of corruption there, because what if the guy who has a monopoly on talcum and there's a substitute for that? They could just deem it ungreen. And I actually wondered if Bloomberg had an interest in aspartame because he was getting rid of sugar. It's like you're driving everybody to NutraSweet.
Yeah. Well, certainly. What's his face from the Pentagon didn't he?
Yes, Monsanto and Rumsfeld.
Yeah, Rumsfeld. Yeah, he certainly did.
And then there was also the guy Chertoff, who was the Homeland Security guy when they implemented the radar in the zippy thing. Here's the problem with the vax and the radar and the aspartame and Monsanto and all that kind of stuff. I don't even care if you steal my money, but you have to force me to pay to be poisoned. Like, do you have to do it that way? Can't you
Yeah,
just like make me buy the vax and let me throw it in the garbage? It's like tax dollars for war. It's like, let me just burn the money if you would.
yeah, yeah. No, that's. I've recently written a piece that hopefully is going to be published soon for Unlimited Hangout about digital ID. And one of the things that one of the companies that's involved in ID20, a company called Accenture, have done. So if you look at the comments that have come from certainly from the White House, I think it was one of the White House spokesmen said, which I've cited in the article, we're not thinking about enforcing a vaccine certificate, which certificate means passport. They've switched the words around just to make it more confusing for everybody, right? But we're not thinking of enforcing a vaccine certificate. We think that ought to be something that is left to private corporations to figure out, right? Now, so what they're doing is they're saying it's nothing to do with us. It's nothing to do. It's nothing to do with us. If private corporations, so in this case, a company that's deeply involved with a consultancy company that's deeply involved with ID 2020, which is the UN's overarching body that is setting the standards for global digital ID. It's come up with things called its high-level traveler pass. Right. So this will be a digital ID that links to your vaccination record. Now, this is the way the environment is set to work with that particular digital ID. And it is also the way that the environment is set to work with central bank digital currencies. They're not setting hard and fast rules that you must do this and you must do that. What they are doing is creating an environment of goals and targets, which must be achieved in such a way that whatever you produce, your digital ID product, because they're talking about vendors providing digital ID, has to be what they're calling interoperable.
Right.
So it must be interoperable with all of the other components that are on this, if you call it a digital ID continuum, right? So they set the framework, the policy framework, and then they set the and then through subsidiary private, a global public-private partnership in this case, which is what ID20 is, they set the targets, the specific functionality that an ID vendor must fit their product into. So the vendor is free to use different types of technology, but it must fit into this functional framework, which is interoperable, which means all other components of the ID, the global ID system, can plug into it in a kind of modular way, a bit like an app that can plug in to the API, right? So you create the API and then the modules plug into it. So that from this is the interesting thing. From our perspective, we will never probably confront, certainly in the UK, who is dead against digital ID. We've rejected it repeatedly when asked. We will never be confronted with a digital ID card. They'll never say that is your digital ID card. What they'll say is, oh, you need a digital ID if you want to go on holiday. You need a digital ID if you want to shop in that store. But what they're not telling you is that every single component of that digital ID network is interoperable and it all feeds the data back to a single centralized database. So that is what they're creating for digital ID, and it is also what they are creating for central bank digital currency globally.
And a big stepping stone to that seems to me that the don't touch money, cashless transactions, touchless transactions during COVID.
No, it's all part of that. Yeah.
So it's, if you can't use cash and all financial transactions, like all non-cash financial transactions, have to be interoperable, then you're just de facto completely in that system. And I mean, Apple Pay is a perfect example, or PayPal. Like I load all my credit cards up to PayPal, and sometimes it'll just say you want PayPal to cover this, and I'll just hit PayPal and it's completely done. And that's my, like, eventually I will just use PayPal because it's just that button keeps coming up and it's perfect. And I know like my stuff's in there, but
Yeah,
I never use cash. I mean, I like cash, but I don't.
yeah. I mean, and
Impractical.
the way that it will be sold to us is through convenience. This will be so much easier. You know, for example, I mean, one of the problems that we have at the moment, I mean, it's something that they commonly do in the UK, and you might suspect that there's an element of putting you off cash with this as well, is if you try and pay for anything in cash in the UK, I'm not sure what the limit is, but it's low. It's only about £1,500 or something like that. It might even be lower than that. If you go and try and take that amount of cash out of your own bank account, you have to jump through all kinds of ID hoops to get it out. It's not enough just to show them your driving license. You have to show them, you know, a not a bank statement, you get it from the bank, but you have to show them you know, something like some sort of utilities bill. You have to get
Wow.
someone to verify, you know, all this kind of stuff, right? So they're putting you off using cash, getting the cash out of the bank. With central bank digital currency, because it will be linked to your digital ID, which is pre-approved, one of the advantages they will say,
Yeah.
right, is, oh, you don't have to worry about these identity checks anymore. So you can, you know, it makes, so for that's reducing the cost
Yeah.
for the bank. So they'll say it reduces costs, so that because the bank doesn't have to do any of this, which is all true. It's all true. Those things are true. But the reason that you don't have to verify your ID anymore is that you're firmly and constantly
Yeah.
on the grid, right? You
So
can't get off the grid.
yeah, so I would suspect that they put those barriers up just to give you a way to get past them. And it's somebody, I was online at the airport, an international situation, and they keep trying to push this global entry thing clear or whatever, but it's definitely an international global entry. And the guy next to me, I said, this is, I guess we concluded that they had deliberately slowed down the line we were in so that people would be forced to sign up for this thing to catch their flight or whatever. I wasn't even my idea, and I'm definitely the most conspiranoid. But we also have recently, so for us to get, I think it's closer to $5,000, and it's still just your driver's license. But there's a new tax law that if you have any transactions over $600, which is really low, you have to fill out a tax form.
Yeah,
So if were automatically, if that were automatically, because then at the same time they're talking about how the IRS can just do they're trying to get approval to have the IRS just do your taxes automatically. And
mm,
if they perfect that $600 thing, then it would just feed into that, and you wouldn't have to come up with the paperwork if they had your ID, because it would feed right into your IRS account. So I
yeah,
feel like they're putting up laws that are so inconvenient that you are then going to beg for the convenience. And I mean,
yeah.
realistically, what are people going to do? How far can your resistance go?
So CBDC will automatically do all that for you. It will calculate all the tax on every transaction. It will automatically pay it to the government. It will automatically, you know. So, for example, when you pay your utilities bill, so with CBDC, you can envisage like with the Internet of Things. So that let's not forget that their model is to give the smart contract writing capability to the private banks, to the commercial banks, and to commercial financial institutions and payment gateways like PayPal and so forth, right? So they'll be able to write the smart contracts. So they can put a smart contract on your CBDC that when you pay your utility bill, or not even when you pay your utility bill, with the Internet of Things, your washing machine
Yeah.
will be able to automatically deduct money from your central bank digital currency wallet, pay it to the utility provider, pay it to the energy provider. And if they put in a smart contract to give some kickbacks to their investors, like BlackRock or someone like that, they'll get their cut as well. And it'll all be done automatically because for you, that will be more convenient.
And you could refine, even I went to Harvard undergrad, and which I was shocked because my father's a hardcore libertarian. He didn't even want me to go. I dropped out of high school at his suggestion. I ended up in community college. He was like, you go to Harvard, you become a socialist, whatever. And to my amazement, I took economics and they talked about how taxes can create, unless it's like a head tax where everybody has to just pay $1,000, it creates a suboptimal efficiency in how you spend your money. Like people aren't going to get the most utility because some things are taxed and other things aren't. And then, of course, the guy, I think it was Martin Feldstein or something. He was like a big shot economist. He said, so then you have to ask the question, because it's not unintended consequences, because you know that there are consequences. You create a tax scheme to encourage the spending you want and discourage the spending you don't want. But for us, like we only have, and when he talks about at the time, we only have certain, like a limited number of tools that we can use. You have income tax, you have brackets, you have sales tax. But in this case, the level of nuance, like, whatever, doing too many loads of laundry, using hot water instead of cold water. And what it'll do is on a smart machine like that, it would tell you this load of laundry will cost you $3.50. Or just it'll say it'll cost you $3.50, but this other kind of laundry is $1.25.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing they'll do in terms of, managing the economy is that India have already suggested with the digital rupee, India have already suggested, and they're not alone. I think Russia, China, India, quite a few countries have already suggested putting a time limit on their CBDC.
Yes.
So if they issue you 6,000 rupees,
you cannot save
e-rupees, right?
Yeah.
You've got to spend them within the time limit. So that is directly stimulating economic
inflationary. Yes.
Yeah, right. Okay. So that is directly stimulating, but they can also, and this is what a lot of central banks and certainly the Bank for International Settlement have looked at length. They can also put a negative interest rate on it.
Yes. Right? The IMF has actually talked about that.
IMF talk about it, World Bank, and So if you put a negative interest rate on your money, then keeping it, just holding it, is costing you money.
Saving.
Right? So
if you don't want to be dependent as an old person, if you don't want to be dependent on Social Security, I mean, what can you do? I mean, I guess you can buy real estate and stuff. I know we have to talk about this, something I read in one of your articles about that. But there's a few more things I want to hit here. And just before we get to that, I wanted to ask you just a few things on that topic. Do you think that our out of control national debt will be used as a catalyst for failure? Because you said somewhere like BlackRock said our system is, quote, tapped out, and that encouraged gave the central bank an excuse to do some of this going direct, which was buying assets right in the open market or from non-banks to get base money or broad money or whatever directly to the people. So I'm just thinking, do you think that our like completely flagrant profligate borrowing is meant to make things fail or appear to fail? Do you see that as a part of this at all?
I think it's fairly clear that since 2008, the complete abandon with which they've been creating money out of thin air and just ramping up the asset purchases. I mean, the Fed's balance sheet has just gone astronomical to trillion, from billions to trillions. Right. So to my mind, that indicates to me that they've got no interest in the current monetary system and the current fiat monetary system, because it's going to go
I think
pop.
That's right. Yeah. Right. It cannot be resolved.
It cannot be resolved. So if you look at moving to what you were talking earlier about SVB, what SVB reveals is, if you look at the total balance sheet, that what the FDIC calls the composite balance sheet for the entire banking system, US banking system, currently they're suggesting that what SVB's collapsed has indicated is its exposure to what they're calling unrealized losses. So these are assets that they bought, bonds, might be corporate,
bonds,
but a lot of treasuries, right? So this is a lot of corporate and mainly government debt that they bought, right? Because these were supposedly secure investments at a lower interest rate inflation has gone up because of the expansion of the monetary supply, which is the definition of inflation, which we've forgotten
Yes.
about, right?
Always and everywhere.
Yeah, right. So that's gone up. That's gone up. The central bank has responded by putting up interest rates, right? Which means that those assets that SVB were holding on to
Yes.
have deflated in value by the
Yes.
equivalent amount. Right. Now, if you extrapolate that across the entire US banking system, considering that other banks are sitting on similar amounts of assets, meant much more in many occasions. JP Morgan have got 500 billion compared to SVB's 49 billion. So that it's orders of magnitude bigger, right? You have to apply a haircut to the value of they're claiming those as assets, but you've got to apply a haircut to them. Now, if you put that across the whole banking system, what that means is that the total amount of exposure is somewhere in the region of 650 plus billion, right, in unrealized losses, which means that that's similar to what triggered the last bailout, which was 700 billion. But that's not all, because they're also claiming assets for what they're calling loans and leases. They're saying that this is the price, the value of these assets, these loans and leases. But those loans and leases were also made at pre-inflationary pre-inflationary level. So you've got to apply the same cut to them.
Yeah.
Now the cut to that, now they value at $12.3 trillion.
Wow, really?
So if you add that cut, then you're looking at a hole in the overall in the entire FDIC, what they call their composite balance sheet, of at least 2 trillion less in assets than they're claiming.
And the interest
which
rate
is
has
unrecoverable.
it has a compound, unless interest rates were to plummet back down to like zero, which maybe it's too late anyway. But and those ones, like a mortgage, which would be long term, is not getting refinanced probably a very long time. And for every year, the price of the bond goes down, like as a function of the duration. So if something's just 1 year where you could trade it out for 7% interest, then it goes down by whatever 5%. But if it's 10 years that you've got a 2% loan and the going rate is 5%, that's gonna have a compound impact on the net present value.
Which is what SVB did. They put those long-term treasuries in their what they called held to maturity account.
Yeah.
So they put a bet on for 10 years
that they were not going to have to sell that. And so, okay. So the last thing I want on that topic, and then I want to talk about tokenization, is so the Bank for International Settlements is what you call the central bank, or the bank of the central banks. And so what, and that they seem to be calling the shots here, but when I look at their structure, it's just the central bankers and Christine Lagarde and Jerome Powell, but surely those people aren't in charge. Who do you think are individuals, or is like the Rockefellers or the Rothschild? Like, what is it that you see as the power behind that? Is there like a somebody who's influential there that isn't on the roster because he's not an actual central banker, or where to come from? Like, what's the story there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can speak. I don't know so much about other central banks, but I can certainly speak about the Bank of England. So the Bank of England is one of those central banks that is a member of the Bank for International Settlements, and the purpose, the stated goal and purpose of the Bank for International Settlement is to manage monetary policy globally, right? So that's monetary policy, which is an important component of every government's policy. But that's not managed by government. It's managed by the banks, it's managed by the central banks, and it's managed by the Bank for International Settlement, who are in Switzerland. Right?
You can absolutely see how it's coordinated, because it looks to me like when they had to have a lot of stimulus and bring the interest rates down. And I remember it looked to me like it was rotating, like one would take a turn and then another would take a turn and then another would take a turn. And it was having an impact on the global markets. And I was like, oh, it's their turn. Now the dollar's strong, but I feel like they obviously coordinate it. And I guess that's where.
Yeah, and so if we just take the Bank of England, which is the bank that I'm most familiar with, the central bank that I'm most familiar with, It is run by its court of directors. It's not run by the government. We can put aside this idea that it's run by the government. It is not run by the government. The people don't own it, right? It's not. This is a
Right. Us
myth.
neither.
This is a, yeah. Well, certainly in the Fed's case, the Fed are far more open about it. I mean, the Fed have just openly admitted that they're a private bank. So I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Oh, I see. Yeah.
but in the Bank of England's case, it is run by its court of directors. All of its court of directors are appointed by the Crown, not the government. The Crown,
Wow. I knew the
right?
crown had power. People are like, oh, they have no power. I'm like, I'm pretty sure they own the world, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the Crown is just one. Personally, I think that
Yeah.
the Crown is just one kind of powerful
Right.
institution. I
Yeah.
think they're all they all operate within a network.
Yes. Yes.
Personally, but the Crown appoints the board of directors. When the board of directors take their oath of office to the Bank for England, they swear their allegiance to the bank. They also swear their allegiance to silence. It's secret. Their decision making is secret.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Perforce. Like that's
Right.
what they
Yeah.
say. They have to because
Yeah.
otherwise they couldn't do the policies.
Yeah. So the bank
Funny.
in the British case, the Bank of England is a private corporation run in secret by a group. I mean, this is openly stated
Yeah.
by the
Right.
Bank of
Right.
England, right? Is by
Undisputed.
a group that is appointed by the Crown, not the government. That's
See
what.
this.
So that and they set monetary policy in the UK. So when you think about it, monetary policy is one of the main mechanisms by which any government can
Yes.
facilitate fiscal policy.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
It,
Yes.
it can't. The two are interlinked. So
Yeah.
fiscal policy is pretty, the setting of taxes and the gathering of revenue and the distribution of that revenue. That is pretty much, other than starting wars, that is pretty much all that government does. This monetary policy, without which fiscal policy can't function, is not controlled by governments. It is controlled by private institutions. So that's the situation.
I
And that,
feel like. Sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, and with CBDC, more power is shifting over to those private institutions because
Yes.
they're openly saying that not only will we issue all the currency, and this is important, CBDC, just as when a commercial bank makes a loan and they create a deposit, that is a liability of the commercial banks. When the central bank makes a loan and creates a deposit of base money, that is a liability of the central banks. So the central banks will create this CBDC as their liability. So it will be their money, not our money. It will never be if in a CBDC world, this is really important to remember. Nobody who uses CBDC, and if that's everybody, that'll be a lot of people, will ever have their own money ever again. If they use CBDC, it's not your money, it's the central bank's money.
I mean, at that point, you just want to hoard gold, but you probably aren't going to be able to buy gold at the CBDC.
Yeah, I mean, with CBDC, they would just disable the purchasing of it, or this is what they probably will do: restrict it to approved money makers.
I want to get to that in a second because you have a gold-backed stablecoin in your thing, but I have to before we get to that, and then we can wrap on that. I don't want to take too much of your time, but this idea of tokenized assets blew my mind. Like I've heard explanations of it, but the way you said it, like everything, and this folds into what I have always wanted to talk to you about, but now I understand it, where like every single thing can be on the blockchain. So if you have a house, you can tokenize that asset, like create 500,000 whatevers out of it. You've got like a couple of really cool trees on there and you can subdivide into that. And then I feel like I feel like what would happen if you had a $500,000 real estate tokenized asset, and instead of getting a mortgage like I just did, you might take 250,000 of those, and you could either sell them, in which case you'd be selling half of your house, or I've seen this in the crypto world, maybe you could stake them.
Yeah,
So it looks like you're just borrowing against it. But if anything goes wrong, then you actually do lose that asset probably instantaneously. It just reverts to somebody else's ownership, or they have it
yeah,
in escrow. And because it's, if it really is truly tokenized, maybe it's a bearer thing. It's
yeah,
not like
yeah,
in a title. And I felt like that idea was it just really would change our,
yeah,
like
yeah.
the way we own things, especially property, real property.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you're quite right. So the idea of tokenization is that you ascribe a digital uh, subdivision of anything. So it could be, as you quite rightly. So let's take the idea of a forest, right? You could create a digitalized asset blockchain for a forest, right? So on that blockchain would be all the different trees and subdivisions of the trees, which you could then sell those tokenized assets. So an environmentally conscientious group might bid for those tokenized assets so that they can protect the trees, or a global corporation, a logging company, might bid for those tokenized assets so that they can cut the trees down. So what you do is the innate tokenization of assets, calling anything an asset, such as a forest. You can financialize and commodify anything, anything. So you could, in the example of what Sberbank have done in Russia, which is a quasi commercial bank in Russia. They've created what they call a tokenized digital stable coin. So, and Iran and Russia are talking about using this for international settlements, right? So what they're saying is that they're kind of claiming that it's backed by gold. So they're saying our stable coin, which is a digital coin, is backed by gold. It's a gold backed coin. So even though it all exists digitally, it's gold backed because it's pegged to the value of gold in theory, right? But of course, they're not actually pegging it to gold. What they're pegging it to is a tokenized asset, which is set to gold. So if you imagine, if you got a gold bar and you just chopped it up into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little tiny little pieces, and you sold each one of those to individual investors and called that a token of the bar, right? So you subdivide a gold bar. I mean, this
But
is a
is that
silly example.
physical at all?
No, 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 no,
Like
no, 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 no.
it,
It's
but I
not
mean,
physical.
do you, I realize you're not going to actually chop it up, but like, are you identifying ever a specific bar of gold? Because what we're talking about with the trees is, I believe that we're actually identifying a specific, you could identify one single tree,
Yeah,
tokenize it. And when you send it to the lumber yard, the token that has value there would have a ledger in there that would tell you where that tree came from, who owned it, and
yeah,
that
yeah.
token then is totally traceable. Whereas with the gold bar, is that something where, there's say 1 million, I'm sure that more than this, but 1 million
Yeah.
gold bars in Fort Knox, and you issue one, 1 million tokens, and then you have a fraction of a token. Do they have to be the gold bars that are in Fort Knox, either as a body or as an individual?
Well, that's a good question, because if you start tokenizing physical assets, instead of actually backing it to the value of the asset, you're backing it to the value of the token. But the tokens can be traded.
And
So the
can they be
token that
increased?
yeah, so the tokens can be traded. They can go up or down in value, independently of the value of the gold that's supposedly backing them, right? So what you're actually talking about is a shell game. That's what it really
Right.
is, because
And that's
because
what I always think, like, these digital currencies are maybe not a shell game, but impossible to value, impossible to
yeah,
nail
yeah,
down.
yeah. So let's say that they set the unit value of a tokenized gold asset at I don't know, $100 an ounce, right? but then the value of gold goes down. But in a trading environment, you might think, well, it's still a solid asset. So even though the value of gold has gone down to $80 an ounce, I still judge that this token is worth $120 an ounce as an investment.
Yeah.
So immediately you're claiming that this is all pegged to real value, whereas in fact it's not. It's just another iteration of the same fiat flim flam that we're currently suffering under, currently labouring under. It's a con. It's just another layer of the con.
But I have to say, it does look like it's happening.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any way around it.
Oh, everyone's all in.
So what do we do? Do we hoard gold while we still can? What do you recommend?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm no financial advisor, so I wouldn't listen to
No,
my
but I mean,
advice.
like,
I
how do
live in
you
a
prep?
van.
How do you prep? Nice. How do you prep? I mean, do you have cans of mackerel or do you have silver dimes? Like, what's in your trunk?
I mean, what I would say is you want to sort of be diverse, don't you? You want to diversify your holdings as much as you can. You don't want to rely on any one thing because who knows what's going to happen
Yeah.
do you know what I mean?
I'm collecting bottles of bourbon.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great
I literally am collecting bottles of bourbon. Like, that's money.
Well, I mean that
you
cup.
can use that.
Keep that cup. You know, that's going to be worth something. You know,
this cup definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
keep that. So I mean, yeah, but I mean those kind of things. I mean, we need to think probably about. Certainly, we need to think about alternative payment systems and how we are going to function as human beings in this environment. You know, I mean, theoretically, I mean, there's all sorts of questions about CBDC which don't quite sort of aren't resolved yet. For example, theoretically, every transaction can be mapped and traced and everything. So how are they going to? How is the CIA going to smuggle weapons if every transaction can be mapped and tracked and everything like that? I mean,
how are they going to get their
presumably the CIA is still going to smuggle weapons, right?
And
they're not going to. They're not going to stop.
They trade them for drugs. You've got so I mean,
well,
you could just do
so
barter,
I mean,
but
how are they going to? You know, how is all the secret services going to do their dirty deals and everything like that? How are the banks going to do their dirty deals?
Yeah.
How are they going to launder cartel money?
Definitely. Good point. Talk about bread and butter.
So some sort of mechanism will have to coexist. I mean, the point is that it's, you know, by giving more control to the commercial banks, giving them the power to write the smart contracts, you're creating a lot of scope there for what they can do with those contracts.
Oh,
you know, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of.
Oh, I had a friend who I didn't know this. He was a Mexican guy or Texican, and he had a card in his wallet that he said if he's ever caught with drugs, he gets off because he's like a quasi, he's a deputized like undercover agent guy. And it was really
drug smuggler.
Yeah, it was super weird. I mean, and he was my plumber. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But
I'm not sure I would. I know. Yeah,
I know it was a little sketchy. But I was thinking, like, they give people passes.
Yeah.
The CBDC's own personal or the CIA's own personal gets a pass. Like, oh, we're allowed to buy illegal cocaine with this. Like, passes exist.
Well, I mean, exactly. I mean, ultimately, the criminal economy is, I don't know what the figures are, but it's at least as big, if not bigger, than the official economy.
It has to be, because we need crime to justify the government crime. You know what I mean? We have these competing cartels. They're not going to let crime go away, even though they say that's why they want this.
So I mean, if they stamp down with all this stuff, if they try to impose this level of control, the black market's going to flourish. There's no doubt that will happen. I mean, people aren't once. Right. I think once people realise the breadth and scope of what they are trying to do to them in terms of controlling their lives, people are going to react to that. And I think one of the encouraging things about us as a species is that, and this is something that John, and by the way, I have to give credit to John Titus for a lot. John Titus from the excellent YouTube channel Best Evidence for a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about to you today, because he's the one that spoke about the split monetary circuit.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. I'll put that in the
yeah.
show notes.
So
Great.
John Titus from Best Evidence is definitely worth checking out. But more to the point, when they create this kind of pressure on people, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. These central bankers and all these people that are trying to enforce their will, they really have got no control over what the reaction will be. I mean, there are millions and millions of teenagers toiling away on crypto in their bedrooms who can probably run rings around the NSA, right? So what will be the reaction? We don't know, but what is certain is that we must resist this with everything. We must resist this. We must not adopt CBDC. We must not allow that to become our primary source, our primary medium of exchange. You know, we need to insist on using cash. We need to use alternative payment systems. We need to trade. We need to barter. We need to create our own payment systems. Things like there's a scheme called Let's in the UK, which is local exchange trade mechanisms, right?
Oh,
Systems.
cool.
So these are alternative forms of currency. Now, whenever these things
I've seen that. Yeah.
So whenever these things spring up, there's always some sort of regulation that says, oh, you can't do that because we can't tax it or something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, people will adapt. So, you know, I mean, one of the frightening things in what the Bank of England have presented is that one of the deputy director of their financial services committee, I think, or directly, I can't remember his exact title, but a guy called John Cunliffe, when he was announcing the digital pound, he said, you know, we want to set a ceiling of how much people can hold, maybe 20,000 or 10,000, right? We haven't decided yet, right? So this is what he said. If we pay people in CBDC, then with a 20,000 limit, we should be able to pay most people in the UK. So what he's saying is that if you've got private corporations are in on this, and you know, people's businesses, their employers, if their employers start paying them in CBDC, then what choice are they going to have but to use it?
Yeah, of course. It's
voluntary.
all they have.
It's voluntary, other than the fact that they're not going to pay you in anything else.
But boy, they can put wage caps.
Wage caps.
That would be a de facto wage cap.
All the stuff that we are used to, everything that we are used to. So wage negotiations, you know, union representation, democracy itself, because legislation will become less important. All of that in a CBD. This is what people aren't grasping. In a CBDC world, it all changes. It all changes.
Twice you've reminded me of fascist, like literal fascist policies. One was Hitler had the like labor unit, like there was a coin. Supposedly, this is when they decided he had to go. There was a coin for 1 unit of labor, and it was quite egalitarian because that's what you would get no matter what the nature of your labor. And that I wouldn't be surprised if that comes in this way. And Ezra Pound, I think, was like a card-carrying Mussolini fascist. Very excellent writer, though. Interesting person. They committed him, I think, unjustly, actually. But he wrote, he wanted money to expire. He did not want it to be a store of value if it was a medium of exchange, because he felt like there should be, because the fascists were into stimulating the economy quite a bit.
Yeah.
So it's just funny because these are, you know, fascist ideas, and nobody would.
Well, I mean, when you think, if you think about the kind of the original sort of the fascismo, the Italian definition of fascism, it is an amalgam of the, you know, within the state. The state is everything. It is an amalgam of the government and private corporations. Yeah. That is, you know, it's not entirely, but that is central to the definition of fascism. We are talking. That's what we're looking at. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah, that's definitely what it is, and I guess we have to encourage the resistance. And I would say I just want to recap, if you would, where I'll put all the stuff in the show notes. Um, when I hit the outro, I want you to just wait a minute because I have a little upload issue with the way I'm recording this right now. So if you would tell people how to find you and how to get more of this stuff. I mean, I love your writing. I love your research, and you're so prolific. I don't know how you have the time. You must be really efficient at it, because I mean, I can't keep up. So tell people about that.
Yeah, you can find most of my work, or a lot of my work, at my own website, which is iaindavis.com, which is IAIN Davis.com. You can also find my work at Unlimited Hangout. It's also reshared by the Off Guardian. You can find it. I'm fortunate, I've just been asked to start writing for Geopolitics and Empire.
Oh,
Um,
great. Oh, we love
yeah, that's great.
Forewarned.
Yeah, but I've also been also at UK Column. You can find my work there. It's shared by a lot of outlets, so you often find my work at places like Lou Rockwell, and also Technocracy News. Yeah,
And to
so
support you
it's
directly would be your Substack to support you directly?
yeah, please check out my Substack, and you can. There's plenty of links on my website and on my Substack, obviously, to how you can support my work. My book is freely available. My books are freely available at my website to anybody who wants one. And yeah, just check out my work, and check out what I'm saying. And one thing I would say, and something that I always say to people, is what I'm trying to do is offer people evidence that is not commonly reported. That's it. It's up to us to make up our own minds about what we think about all this stuff.
Yeah,
It's
no theory in the stuff that you write.
yeah, I'm not
No, it's well
advocating
established, yeah.
one particular theory or another.
No, but
I'm
it's
just
evidence. It is, it's totally
yes,
evidence-based.
I
It's
try and
and
keep it as
traceable.
evidence based. Yeah,
That's why I clicked through when I was reading these articles. I clicked through to a lot of your resources. I did some outside work to, like, kind of get it more context for what you were saying. That's when I stumbled upon Professor Werner's work. And I
yeah.
thought, that's a pretty mainstream source. He's a professor of these subjects. And it was like your explanation of it was more accessible for me, but it reflected the principles. So I find that it's all, your stuff checks out. So thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate it. Wait just a second. And thank you all for listening. This has been Deep Dives with Monica Perez.
Thank you.